Okay, so we're going to wrap up World War II today. We're on lesson 4. The Japanese government announced it intends to take over all of Asia. So just like Hitler's trying to take over all of Europe, they're trying to take over all of Asia. And remember, previously they invaded China and took over Manchuria. This type of aggression goes against the policies we have set up with China. We have something called an open door policy, which basically meant that all countries could trade with China, but if Japan is going to walk in there and take over, that's going to violate that policy. So Japan says, you know what, we're doing it anyway. Japan joined with Germany and Italy to form a group called the Axis powers. So now you got Japan, Germany, and Italy all on the same team. Japan invades a place called Indochina in June of 1941. Indochina is just south of China. The United States is starting to get worried because Japan is getting more and more territory and becoming similar to how Hitler is taking over country after country. So we decide we're going to stop selling them steel and oil. Remember, Japan is a small country with not a lot of resources naturally. So we stop selling them steel, we stop selling them oil, and this is going to make it much harder for them to make tanks and planes and weapons. Japan needs the oil, and they get upset with us. We also invite China to take part in our Lend-Lease program, where we're giving weapons to our allies. When Japan invades Indochina, Roosevelt decides he's going to freeze any of the assets Japan has in America. And that's like basically their bank accounts were frozen. They couldn't access any money that they had in America. Japan's prime minister and the United States secretary try to negotiate to figure out a deal where Japan can still buy supplies from us and maybe we can get something we want out of it. The Japanese wanted all of their money back and they wanted us to sell them steel and oil. And they weren't willing to give anything in return. We said we wanted them to leave China. They said no. So what happens is the negotiations fail. So Japan starts planning what they're going to do to us. On December 7th, 1941, on a Sunday morning, 353 Japanese airplanes took off from a military base, and they were flying towards our military base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Their mission was to destroy all of our boats and all of our planes there. We did not know they were coming, and if Japan can destroy our boats and planes that are close to them, it's going to make it much harder for us to retaliate. So Japan bombs the ships. They attack this military base without any warning. It happens early in the morning. We're not ready for it. And more than 2,000 American soldiers die. We lose many of our battleships, many of our planes, and they say this date will go on in infamy. And infamy means something that is famous for bad stuff happening. 4 days after this happens, Germany and Italy declare war along with Japan on the United States. So remember, we were trying to stay out of the actual fighting. We were selling weapons to the countries involved, but we weren't taking part in the fighting. Now that Japan has attacked us, that changes our mind on what we're going to do. Japan followed up its attack on Pearl Harbor by invading the Philippine Islands, where we also have some military stuff set up. And once again, they're not ready for them, and Japan is easily able to take over. So the United States has to get ready to fight now, because we know the fight has started. They have attacked us. We need to defend ourselves. The United States was not ready to fight in Europe and Asia at the same time, though. We have to make a decision on whether we're going to fight Germany or Japan first. We got to evaluate which one's a bigger threat. But if you remember, in the previous lesson, we talked about the Great Depression and all these factories that were closed. Well, now that we're getting ready for a war, all these factories that were closed are going to start opening back up, making war supplies. The car company, General Motors, they start making war supplies and making things for like tanks and planes and ammunition. And that one company alone is able to make more supplies than Japan and Germany combined. You got to think, all these factories we had sitting around, just closed because there was not enough work, not enough money. Now they have something to do, and they're making just tons and tons of supplies for us to get ready to fight. The war united the American people. It gave us something to come together for. There was posters of, telling people to be patriotic and to do their part. American civilians helped out in many different ways too. One of the things they would do is they would plant their own gardens and grow food so farmers could focus on feeding the soldiers. Usually those were called victory gardens. They also needed raw materials, and American people started collecting recyclables like cans and rubber and things like that can be reused in making war supplies. During this time, a lot of goods were in short supply, meaning there wasn't enough of everything. So the American people were asked to ration how much they used. And ration means when you use less of something. The people in America were given these things called ration books. And ration books would have stamps in them. And these stamps would be for like specific products. So if you went to the store and you wanted to buy a gallon of milk, you'd have to give them the money plus the stamp out of your ration book. And this was to make it so one person didn't buy up everything, so there would be enough to go around. This rationing of supplies also changes the clothing style. They started making clothes, shorter. They started making women's dresses shorter, women's skirts shorter, and they started taking extra fabric out of the clothing people were wearing, so they'd have more leftover stuff to make military uniforms. Women joined the armed forces in lots of numbers. They were nurses, they were working at the factories, they were doing pretty much everything except for the actual combat. Millions of women replaced these men in the workforce, in the factories, making the planes, making the tanks, making the ammunition and the tracer rounds. So you got many of these women moving into these factory jobs. You also have many African American men moving up north, getting these factory jobs, filling these positions that have been left empty by the American soldiers going off to fight. So there was lots of discrimination still in our country. Racism was still around, and there was some workers that were upset about the African American men getting jobs in factories, and they were threatening to go on strike if they had to work alongside African Americans. So President Roosevelt says, nah, that's not going to fly. He makes it illegal to have racial discrimination in any company that's working for the war, making war supplies. So basically he says, if you're going to discriminate, you're not going to get a government contract, you're not going to make these things we need. Strikes still occurred at several shipyards by white workers when the African American workers were hired and they arrived. But these African American workers played a major part in getting these factories running and making enough supplies to supply all of our soldiers and all of our men. There we go. So, we're doing a lot of good things during this war, but we also do some pretty shameful things. There are many people in America that have Japanese ancestry, meaning their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents were Japanese, but they've lived in America their entire lives. They're American citizens, but we didn't treat them that way during this time. A lot of people were afraid that these Japanese Americans would betray America and be loyal to Japan. And President Roosevelt ordered many of these Japanese American citizens into these detention camps, which was basically like a prison camp. And it wasn't because they did anything wrong, it was just because they were Japanese, just like the people we were fighting with. Except they're not really Japanese, they are Americans who a long time ago came from Japan. Japanese American soldiers fought bravely in Europe. They fought alongside other Americans, even though their government was putting them in prison camps. So they were brave despite being treated poorly by our government. So we have to make a decision. Do we fight Japan or do we fight Germany first? We decide that Germany is a bigger threat than Japan. So we have to defeat Hitler and Germany. The only way to defeat Germany was to invade from multiple different sides with multiple different countries having our support. Because Germany is ready for us. They have these beaches lined with lined with traps, and they have an incredibly powerful army. They know we're coming for them, so they get ready for it. So the Nazis had known for a long time the United States was coming, and they get these beaches ready at a place called Normandy. They have barbed wire, they have landmines, they have machine guns set up on this beach because they know this is where we're going to land. General Dwight D. Eisenhower commands these soldiers, these American soldiers, to go storm the beach of Normandy in France. This day becomes known as D-Day, and it's a very tough battle, and it's really rough because lots of stuff goes wrong. The American soldiers that get dropped off at Normandy are supposed to have tanks, and they're supposed to have all these military supplies, but many of the tanks that get dropped end up sinking in the ocean, and it does not go great for us. The battle is very tough. We lose lots of soldiers, but we are able to take the beach and advance closer to Germany. By December of 1944, the Allies were confident that the Germans were trapped. We thought we had Germany on the ropes and we were about to win, but Germany counterattacks and they push us back. The fighting goes back and forth for a while, and General George Patton and the Allies are able to push the Germans back again for a final time. This becomes known as the Battle of the Bulge. So now Germany is kind of on the ropes. They're on the run. They have lost the battle and they are becoming weaker. So we start to come up with a plan on what we're going to do if we can defeat Germany. And this plan is called the Yalta Agreement. President Roosevelt gets reelected for a fourth term. President Roosevelt was president longer than any other president, so he was elected 4 times. But if you remember from a couple chapters ago, he has polio, which is a disease that makes him weaker and weaker and weaker. So he's got that, he's getting older, and he's been president during the Depression and World War, some of the most stressful times. And it's getting really hard for him to keep up with all of these things going wrong. So there was hope that the war against Germany would end in early 1945. We met with the other countries, our allies, and Roosevelt and Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, agreed to a plan. So that plan, the Yalta Agreement, has a couple of points. First, the Soviet Union agreed to join us in the fight against Japan after Germany was defeated. Afterwards, Germany is going to get split into 4 separate zones that would be controlled by the Allies. After that, the Soviet Union would hold democratic elections to choose their leaders. And then a group called the United Nations would be created. And the United Nations' job would be to squash any fight before it turns into another world war. So how does this war end? So things were going our way, but we're going to have a turn of bad luck. President Franklin Roosevelt dies from his polio in 1945. The nation was in shock. He's been our president for 13 years, longer than any other president. A lot of people loved him for what he did during the Depression, and now he's gone. And he's gone during a war. So some other countries might see that as a weakness because our president is gone now. Vice President Harry Truman became the president. And shortly after that, Adolf Hitler was cornered in a bunker. And Hitler, knowing what he had done, killing 6 million Jews, and, this terrible war initiative he had, he was never going to go peacefully to jail, and Hitler ends up committing suicide to avoid being captured or killed. So now the United States, once we defeat Germany, we know Japan's next, and we begin advancing our military towards Japan. So the Japanese soldiers are relentless. They will never give up. It's part of their culture that they don't give up. And a lot of people think that no matter how long we fight, Japan will never surrender. President Truman finds out about a brand new weapon we have called the atomic bomb. And this bomb can erase an entire city, just gone. So Truman has to make a decision now. Do we take this brand new weapon, this atomic bomb, and drop it on Japan and end the war to save many American lives? Or do we continue fighting the normal way and potentially lose millions of American soldiers? So Roosevelt has to make that decision. Do we drop this terrible weapon, or do we lose more Americans? So Truman sends a message to Japan, giving them a warning, basically telling them, we have this terrible weapon we will use. You need to surrender. And Japan kind of thinks we're bluffing. So Japan refuses to surrender, and Truman decides it's time to drop the bomb. A plane takes off called the Enola Gay, and it drops a bomb on the city of Hiroshima. So we drop this atomic bomb not on a military base, in the middle of a city where regular people live. And when we drop that bomb, about 130,000 people are killed or wounded instantly. Some of them are just gone completely, no bodies. They're just erased by the heat, turned into dust, and they disappear. I'm going to show you guys a video clip of it in just a minute.
I saw an aircraft, like a tiny silver drop, entering the sky above Hiroshima. I instantly recognized it as an American plane, as no Japanese aircraft could fly at that altitude at the time. It was just one plane, so I assumed that it was passing by as usual.
And I was counting. 1, 2, 3.
I was wiping the desktop. That was when the bomb was dropped.
It took about 45 seconds from the time the bomb left the airplane until it exploded. And I think there wasn't a man in the airplane that wasn't either timing it with his watch or counting or doing something. I was sure the bomb was a dud. I was sure it wasn't going to work.
After falling for 43 seconds, the time and barometric triggers started the firing mechanism. A uranium bullet fired down a barrel into a uranium target. Together, they started a nuclear chain reaction. Solid matter began to come apart, releasing untold quantities of energy.
Not of the actual thing, but something pretty similar. So 3 days later, Japan has not surrendered. We drop a second atomic bomb on the city of Nagasaki, killing 75,000 more people. So we've killed 200,000 people with 2 bombs. They're just gone forever. Japan asks for a ceasefire. They surrender, and we accept it. World War II is finally over. Okay, guys, so now I need you to go into Google Classroom. You can open up chapter 26, lesson 4, 5, 6.